Record to the cloud or on this computer? Let's try to the cloud.
Okay. That's what you do.
Oh, I just started a cloud server. Yeah, I was playing COD last night with Ian, and it's funny because like one of our servers was lagging, and it was reminding us when back in the day we played like Counter-Strike.
And you have to like check the ping and everything.
Yeah, exactly. And people would host their own servers.
Yeah.
And then you realize like, man, kids these days, they truly, it makes me sound so old, but they do not understand like what it was like back then, because like it would be like some like 13-year-old kid who just learned about Linux running like a CS server from literally like a box in his room.
Yeah, that asshole had zero lag either.
Yeah,
what was
exactly.
there was a program. It was like GameSpy or something like that you'd go on and it would like list all the servers.
Yeah,
and you
that's
could like
right.
I
can't remember
like
what it was.
sort by ping.
Yep, and but you would favorite them, and they would be like good servers because it's just so funny that was like the responsibility of the community, you know.
I would play on the server that was it was Assault. Do you remember that map?
Oh yeah, of course.
It was like the warehouse.
Yeah,
and that's all it was. It was just that over and over again, and the people were really good.
Oh,
they were
yeah.
like really, really good.
So you would see the same people every day.
Oh yeah. And I would just get wrecked, but it was like you could feel yourself leveling up.
Yes.
And I love that. I love that game.
I know. I played so many hours. I was actually pretty good at one point, like, you know, sniping, whatever it was, like really dialed in with like a really fancy mouse and everything. But I do like that consistency, and you see the same people. It's just a different world. So now, I mean, these days, like Call of Duty, they're all cloud servers that run by like the game company, right? I mean, all those servers that you join when it matchmakes you are just...
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's a better experience too.
Totally
right?
better experience. But people don't appreciate. They'll never understand, you know?
Some 12-year-old kid just, you know, turning on all like the hacks
custom
and
mods.
flying,
Yep.
yeah, flying around the map,
Exactly.
screaming at you.
Exactly. Well, anyways, with that introduction, here we are, back with the same show. So I'm excited, man. I don't know about you, but I'm excited to launch this new rebrand of our show here. And this is episode 1 of Frontend First, or episode 95, in whichever way you look at it. But this is the first episode with our new brand. And by the time you are seeing this, we should have a new name. We should have a new artwork. And other than that, the show is exactly the same, as you can tell from our intro. So if you liked us before, you'll still like us, and if you didn't before, you probably still won't. So you know what you're going to get with us. That's that's for sure.
Yep.
Well, yeah, this is another mainlining coffee day, as I was up till like 4 o'clock in the morning for some reason. Man, I don't know what it is. Sometimes my brain gets going, and I just... Do you ever have that where like I literally can't stop thinking about something, and I'm just lying there, and I realize like there's no rush. I can just wait till tomorrow. Just go to sleep. It'll be there in the morning. But my brain's like, nope.
Yeah, I mean, I think I used to have that more than I do now.
You just think about poker now?
Yeah. No, but like I definitely like the, like, oh, I can't wait to code this thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know, man. It's not much going on in life. I think you can just stay up all night if you're feeling it. And,
I know.
Catch up on sleep in the morning.
Yeah, I've been trying to do some workouts in the apartment, but it's not the same. That's what I like. That's still the thing that's hardest for me. Is like that was getting me tired out, and it would help me sleep at night and stuff like that. So I don't know. Speaking of poker, my brother was telling me that over the weekend he did a poker game with his buddies. So there's a site you can join, and it lets you play with your friends, and then they got on a Zoom call, and then they were all just eating snacks and drinking and stuff, and it was like they were just playing a poker game. I was like, that sounds amazing.
Oh, that's so fun.
Have you ever done something like that?
No, but I do know there's a bunch of people doing that. I think some of the software has like, basically they call it like the home game version, where you can go on and basically do that. You got to set up the Zoom call yourself.
Yeah, that'd be fun. We should try that sometime.
Yeah. Yeah.
Make up for lost time in Vegas this year.
Yeah, there you go.
Cool, man. So what you been working on?
I've been working on a Next app, and then this Gatsby app that I've been talking about the last few weeks.
Speaking of Next.
Yeah, I'm absolutely loving Next. There's just a lot. I don't know. I feel like there's the angle they approach it from is the way that I think of front end development. Yeah, sort of like this holistic back end front end experience. Kind of a loss for words here, but yes, I really like it. I can talk about kind of like the little things I've been discovering that make me like it so much.
Well, it's good to hear that after you've been using it, because when we started using Gatsby, it would be fun to go back and listen to the first few episodes. So I think we were enamored with it at a certain point, because for me, I think the big one was like it was my introduction to GraphQL, really, in like a real way. And I felt like, having come from a world where I was, with the add-ons and the nested add-ons that we have done in the Ember community, and having the build pipeline there be a lot of custom code, and not having one answer to how do you get build artifacts from one dependency and make them available for import or use in like a host app or a host add-on. And so you end up making a lot of that up yourselves. Having the GraphQL layer there, I thought was really innovative and good, because it's like you can write a mess to transform your source into the content mesh, and you can write a mess querying out of it. But at least the content mesh as a GraphQL layer, we have agreed on that hard boundary, and I thought that was such a good idea from Gatsby.
It really is, and I think that's the best thing that Gatsby offers.
Yeah, I think so too. But I also remember, like, when we had started using it more, there were always little things that we ran into that we didn't like about it, because it felt like, as clear as that boundary was, there were other boundaries that weren't clear, and sometimes you're writing really low level, like Node APIs to do things, and they're in a global file. Sometimes you're adding a very high level plugin that is doing a lot of magic for you, and when it works, it works, and when it doesn't, it's a pain. So we've always kind of had mixed feelings about it, but it's cool that you've been using Next for a bit and you still feel like, really good about it.
Yeah. I think I like Gatsby a bit more than you do. I can definitely relate to, like, there are times when I'm using something from Gatsby and I'm like, wow, this is way too high level. I need the low level version of this. And also the opposite of that. But I do, for a content site, for a marketing site, I do like Gatsby a lot. Yeah. I think, like, if we had to reinvent that stuff even in like Next, I think it would be a lot of work.
Yeah.
So I do like that whole content mesh layer. Even I'm willing to accept the other stuff that, like, right, Gatsby's routing and all that stuff.
Right. No, I think that's a good point. Like, I was working on the Mirage site over the weekend, and like, I know for 100% certainty that it would take us longer to build what we've built with Gatsby with Next, or yep, really probably any other tool.
I think if you take something like the inspector, Next would just be like perfect for that. Yeah, because we don't need to transform ESDoc there. We're not like authoring in Markdown to build the doc site. So.
Well, the funny thing is, though, that we are having snippets that are in the file system, and we have a hook use tutorial snippet that lets us seed the inspector with a starting state that is coming from a file that we just wrote, and we just did that ourselves. So if we were to do that without Gatsby, we would have to solve that somehow.
And that uses, like, that queries a mesh to get, like, the contents of that file.
Yeah, exactly. We wrote a Node API that does fs.read sync and pulls those files in and puts them in the content mesh so they can be queried from the front end. And it works great. And so we're setting it up so that, all the examples that are going to be available from the inspector, from the REPL, I started calling it REPL because inspector is just too long. So that's why I changed.
Like, too many words to say.
Just too many syllables. It doesn't look good in the nav. It's a REPL. REPL also, the other big reason was when I was messing around with it, putting it in the nav of the site, like, inspector is like, what is that? Whereas REPL is like, okay, I'm going to click on it and try it out. Like, it's more recognized word, I think.
Cool.
And it still is a good fit. It still is meaningful. But no, that's going to be a really cool thing. So even that would take more work. And also, so I deployed the REPL, and there were some bugs, and I couldn't figure it out because I had written tests for it. We can talk more about what I was doing over the weekend, but the tests were passing locally, and this bug, I couldn't figure it out. And then I realized, like, oh yeah, it's a different thing, because in production it's like running Gatsby build and Gatsby serve rather than dev. And anyways, the fact that Gatsby pre-renders the REPL once I fix the bug is another really cool thing. And I wonder what that experience would have been like with Next, because even though the REPL only makes sense to have running on the client side, because it's literally a client side experience, it still is way better when you pre-render it. Because when I fixed the bug, I started by returning null in server side mode if type of window is undefined, and then the whole REPL would just be not there, and then it would hydrate on the client. But then when I fixed it at the leafmost part, which was like the sandbox component, just ignore that iframe in server side, it feels way better because it actually renders the shell, and it just like, it feels way better. So like that's just another point in Gatsby's favor of having a lot of this stuff nudge you in the right direction out of the box, you know?
Yeah. So I haven't done this with Next where I can't have code that can't run on the server. Everything that I've come across so far has worked in both areas, but I think you'd be able to do the same thing, because Next does pre-render your pages.
So if you were just building it by default, like, it would just pre-render your page.
Yeah, there's a little icon that pops up that says like page has been pre-rendered.
Got you. Okay, cool. I need to build something with it for sure.
It's yeah, I think there's a lot of little abstractions that we've tried to reinvent, or that we've tried to invent in other apps, and it's like, oh, I like their approach.
Yeah.
One of my just as an example of this, one of my favorite things is the way that link works.
Oh, so, that's right.
So link is it's like I need a term for this, but I'm calling it a wrapper component. It's not a renderless component because it does render its children. It doesn't, like when I think of renderless component, I think of a component that takes a function and then invokes that function with new data. So it's I'm calling this a wrapper component. There's probably a better term. What this does is it takes its children and it looks at what its one child is. So if it's an A tag, it's going to clone the A tag and then add all of the props to that A tag that are needed to make the link work. So link, like next link, basically describes the routing, such as like link to this page with these params, and then the child of next link that you author yourself in your app describes the display of that link. So it can be a button, an image, an A tag, and next link is smart enough to inspect its child and add the right props. So if it's an image, it's going to decorate that image with
an A tag
with an on click. So an on click that does navigation to the page that you defined in your link. And I noticed like, so first I think that's like a really cool thing that I can describe my routing separate from my UI.
Yeah.
Because I remember before we were always trying to like come up with like a link tag that could take all these like UI things like active and inactive and
and a link that looks like a button and a button that looks like a link.
Yep. And then as well as all of the actual like routing stuff. So it links to this page. And I kind of like that they found a way to separate the two. And so that I can just describe the button as a button that's going to look that way and function that way regardless of if it's in a link or not. And then I surround it with the link to get the routing behavior.
Interesting. Does it yield like an active state if the link is active?
No. So there's no... No. So that's why I'm not calling it a renderless component, because there's no data that's passed in to the template for you to use. Now, that's a good question. Like as you said,
how would you do like a tabs thing?
Yeah. Does it decorate, because it's like under the hood, it's doing like React clone element and then adding props to that element, like a ref or an on click. Could it also add a prop like data is active, something like that?
Yeah.
And I don't know if it does or not. Everything that I've used to figure out if a link is active or not is there are router hooks, so you can use router, and I just I use that. So I use router, and then I can say if router.query post ID equals the selected post ID, then I know that one is active.
Yeah. See, this is where I still think render props have a place, because I still feel like there's a use case for wrapping up basically that, which is like a dumb wrapper component with a stateful hook into a render prop that you could just link to, and then it yields out is active and all that stuff. But I have to play with this because I haven't played with it yet.
You're probably right, because if you think about it, if you think about it like the thing that you're yielding, you're yielding it for that block of the template.
Exactly.
And so if you use a hook to get route data,
it's like global in a sense.
Yeah, you've separated. Like the hook is at the top of your file, and then like the link is somewhere in the middle of your JSX at the bottom of your file.
Exactly.
So, yeah. I mean, I can definitely buy that. I don't know. Render props seem just, I don't know. I have enough React experience, but render props seem so out of style, because the things that you can do with render props, you can do with hooks. And I tend to just lean towards that, the hook way of doing things.
Yeah. They've fallen out of fashion because they create levels of nesting, and we're the only way to kind of share this state in the template easily before hooks. However, I like, this is one use case that I think still exists, and I think there's other ones too. If you always had to separate your hooks and your components, there's times where you want to share both stateful behavior and rendering. So that's the case where it makes sense to have a render prop component, in my opinion. And so if you had, like, one of the first things when I was learning React, because when we started last year, hooks had been out. That was the way to do it. And so we've always done React with hooks, right? And so you run into this pretty quickly where, like, you have a panel that is open, it renders something, but then you also want to customize the rendering based on the is open state. And so, you can do it separate. And some people in the community were just telling me, like, oh, just enjoy the flexibility. Use hooks up there for your state, keep your component dumb, and boom, you're good to go. And that is more flexible, but there's no reason we should tie our hands behind our back and not embrace a way to share stateful rendering, which still has a use, because that's like the whole point of hooks is that it took different parts of code that was coupled together but in separate locations and lets you put it into one spot. So now if we're doing this again, if these two things always go together but they're in different spots, then it feels like we're missing a really good use case for component abstraction.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I mean, what's the point of flexibility if you're never ever going to flex that thing?
Exactly.
The constraints would be better. So
yeah, I agree. So I think that is interesting. So one thing I saw recently was React Router v6 is coming out, or came out, or is in beta, and I think they have a hook that returns state and a bound component, a partially applied component. So then
awesome.
You could make, you love that stuff. You could imagine your link component, instead of you passing in the URL in the template, you use link as a hook, pass in the URL, and you get back the like anchor tag or the link component tag, but you also get an is active state right there. And then I think it's a lot better because you're only passing in the params in one place, and the hook is managing all that for you.
Very cool.
That was one thing I reached for actually really early on, was like, oh yeah, you want a bound component, can't you return it from a hook? And it seemed like that was a no-no based on some conversations I had on Twitter. But maybe it's not that it's like forbidden, it's just that there's some gotchas if you try to return components from hooks. So
yeah, I remember one of the pieces of feedback from that was like, if you can't tree shake. So when you like import components, you can statically analyze and see where they're being used. But if you have a hook that's importing components and then returning them, you don't really know if they're used or not.
That's right.
You can imagine a form hook.
That's right.
That returns all the form components, like labels and inputs and checkboxes and field sets. Mm-hmm. And you can't eliminate the things you don't use.
Right.
But I think what you're talking about here is these are like a very small set of components. Yes. So I think that's okay.
Yeah. Interesting, man. The other question I had for you was like, if it adds an on-click handler to an image, with that, we'll basically call navigate to the URL, right?
Yeah, they have a whole routing API, and I believe that's what it does.
Mm-hmm.
The on-click handler that it adds is going to then programmatically invoke the router to transition to the thing that you're linking to.
Yeah, but wouldn't you want it to be wrapped in an A tag for like command click and for?
Well, that's up to. I mean, that's up to you.
So you could render an A tag and then an image inside, and it would detect that the first child is an A tag and set up the href.
Exactly. That next link even has something that if you try to have like 2 children under it, it's going to say, I need 1 child.
That's cool, man. That's really cool kind of stuff that you can enforce that in your component APIs.
I think from the developer, that's me writing this code, it's really awesome that I just plop in this link component, and
it's easy to understand and use.
Yep. And it's just, this thing is only about the routing, and it's going to decorate the thing under it.
That's awesome.
I would like a name for these components, because I feel like we've used them a few times and I never know what to call them.
It's like, because it's augmenting the children. It's not renderless. It's actually, it's augmenting the children. It is modifying the rendering in some way. If it was purely yielding state, it could be called a renderless component. But this one makes assumptions about its children and changes them in a certain way.
Right, exactly. So it's not renderless because it does render something. It renders children. And
well, I would say that a component that only renders children is the identity component. It's like a no-op component. And so that's renderless to me in the sense that if you bring it in, it's not going to render anything you don't tell it to. Whereas in this case, this is going to render something different than what you pass in as children. Namely, it's going to augment what you pass in a certain way. So it's really like a decorator component. It's really decorating the DOM that you pass in. So, and as opposed to like a true like a mouse position component that like is like truly renderless, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Decorator is too overloaded, man. Everything's a decorator these days.
Augment is pretty. I like that because that is what it's doing. It's like augmenting the child.
Yeah, augmenting the child. Cool. That sounds like good parenting advice.
Yeah, it's gonna be like some weird sci-fi movie joke. Anyway.
Yeah, I know. I was thinking of like, what was that movie with Matt Damon where he gets all jacked up, Elysium or whatever? Is that what it was called? He like
yeah, it was supposed to be like a Halo movie.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. Elysium.
Was that called Elysium? Yeah.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. Yep.
And it was Matt Damon, right?
Yeah. It was the guy that made it is the guy that made like District 9.
Right.
And he's done a few other things, but loves that like sci-fi category, like dystopian sci-fi.
It's really cool. Did he make the one with the aliens that speak in the language with the circle?
No, that was that's the guy that made the new Blade Runner.
Oh yeah. That is amazing, man.
And
wow.
It's making the Dune movie.
Ooh, that's amazing. I'm so excited for that.
Yeah.
He's great so far. That's I mean, those are some of my favorite movies of the last blockbuster movies of the last few years for sure.
He made Sicario too, which is
I still haven't seen that.
It's so good. It's really just it's awesome. The story is great. The characters are great. Your relationship with the characters is awesome throughout the whole movie, and the shots are just amazing.
Oh, cool.
So yeah, it hits everything.
That's awesome. I don't hear you speak that highly of movies that often, so I'll have to check that one out. Yeah. What's the movie name with the language that was so good?
Arrival.
Yeah, Arrival. I really liked Arrival. I thought it was really unique, really original. So speaking of next, I just found out the day I opened up Twitter and I saw this Vercel announcement. Did you see this?
I did. Yeah, I read the bullet points about what front end development is, and I was like, God, Sam is going to get such a hard on over this.
You read my mind, dude. Like he's like literally preaching. He even said something about commoditizing the back, and I was like, I was like, who is anyone here to witness this? Like it was literally like my thoughts the last 6 months just written out right there, crystal clear, black and white ink on a screen. It was great, man. Vercel. I keep wanting to say Vercel. I think it's Vercel because I think it's versatility, accelerate, and excel or something like that.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I guess so. I'm kind of sad that the Zeit brand is gone. To me, Zeit was pretty awesome.
Yeah.
But I'm sure they have a reason for it. We're rebranding. People rebrand for a lot of reasons. They think about it for a long time, and it feels better after time, I think. So, I don't know. Vercel just it feels like they lost some of their original kind of like not quirky is the right word, but they're just kind of like off in the corner, like hacker mentality, like that image that they conveyed. And now they're like more buttoned up and corporate a little bit.
I know this is a name that 6 MBAs would spend 8 months coming up with.
Exactly. But I'm so happy for them, man. And I'm still so confident in what they're doing. And the team they have is just amazing. And their focus is so good. Their design is so good. Their website is like so simple, man. I was looking around it today. It's like something about, it's so hard to make a simple website, but they do such a good job.
Yeah.
Like they don't waste a pixel. They show you like 3 features of what the thing does, and it's like the perfect screenshot, and there's nothing extraneous about it. Man,
yeah,
impressive stuff.
Yep.
But yeah, so they're going all in on empowering front end developers, betting that companies want to just focus on product and front end and do as little of the stuff in the back end that they can get away with, and cloud services and all that stuff. And I think it's cool that Next is like still a full stack framework. So even though they believe in that mission, or like they believe in that future, they are pragmatists and acknowledge that it's not here today, and you still need to write like serverless functions to like send an email. So
that's awesome, because it's not like a no code tool that doesn't let you write any code and then I believe in this future, but I can't do any work today.
Right. Exactly. Now I will say, like, sometimes it does slip through, and you'll see them say, "Oh, just use contentful or whatever," and it's like, okay, what does that mean? Like, I'm been writing, MySQL backed apps or Postgres backed apps for a while. Like, where is that smooth thing? I still think there's a gap there in terms of maybe it's just education, or maybe like the people that they're serving are way more familiar and use like these bigger tools like Contentful or WordPress headless API, and like that's how big companies just work. A lot of them work today, so I still think there's like a little bit of a gap there. But like I loved the little manifesto, the thing that they wrote. It was like I was like, I'm freaking all here for this, like all day long.
Nice.
So pretty cool. Cool. So what else do we have here? Twin.macro. What the heck did I build with this? This is a way to do Tailwind. I did.
I saw something. I saw like Kenzie Dodds post something that you can create React app without modifying React scripts
to get Tailwind in there.
Yeah. But I'm not sure.
This might have been
complicated.
This might have been what I did. I think I did it for my Egghead video because I wanted to pull in some Tailwind UI components. And I think that's what I did because exactly that. I wanted to see if I could get Tailwind in there. And it's like, it hasn't even been a week, man. My memory, I swear. Maybe it has to do with getting 3 hours of sleep. But it's pretty neat. So it doesn't use like Tailwind. I mean, it does, but it's just totally different. And so it uses this Babel. So Twin.macro is what I'm talking about. It is a Babel macro that you bring into your React project. I think it's React only, And you install it. It brings along Tailwind, and it gives you a TW prop on your JSX elements. And then you have to put like the twin.
Wait, I have a question. Is this specifically made for Tailwind, or is this a...
Yeah, Twin stands for Tailwind.
Gotcha.
Something.
Okay.
Yeah, it stands for Tailwind macro, basically.
Okay.
And gives you a TW prop on your components that you can say TW equals, and then you can just start putting in class names, Tailwind class names.
Cool.
And so there's a couple cool things about this. It's weird. The setup is weird. Like, you know how we import React so that like Babel and your build recognizes that you have JSX in the file?
Yeah, it's not because we're using React. It's more as like a pragma to tell. Exactly. To tell Babel that this is a React file.
Right. so that
I think at least.
Yeah, so that Babel can get in there and do its thing before like your code actually executes. It like turns it all into React.create class, right? Or create element. And so this is the same thing. You actually don't use the React pragma, you use this pragma. And I think it
which is where the word macro comes from, because like you're modifying the AST.
Right. So I think they basically swap that out with however it works under the hood. And that way, like it's just transparent to you basically. And it ends up with like, it just kind of works. But it's not like a runtime thing. So what they do is at Babel build time, they use the TW prop. They apply the classes. I think it uses like emotion or style components under the hood. And it basically applies the styles from Tailwind. And then it creates like unique class names for each thing. So when you look at the output, you just see like these auto-generated class names that have your Tailwind properties on them. And they're like super efficient and organized. Like they, if there's repeated ones, it will share the same class. All that is taken care of by whatever tool they're using under the hood. But this way you don't have to like use purge CSS because you're only actually building up the styles that you use.
Oh,
so it's totally, nice. It's completely pay as you go. You don't even have to configure variants. So like, have you ever had to configure a variant in Tailwind where you're like, I need to do like group hover : box shadow, but by default that's not enabled.
Yes.
I have to do this like 5% of the time, 10% of the time, or whatever.
Yeah.
With this one you don't have to because they just parse your stuff and they build the entire set of styles you need derived from your actual usage.
Now, do you still get access to like Tailwind config.js and all that?
Yes.
Like, is that all the same?
Yep,
Cool.
all the same. So yeah, pretty awesome. So that integration part of it is really cool, except for the pragma thing. It's weird to me. Like I would wish they would be able to configure it once, and like it seems like you had to do that at the top of every file. So it's just ugly. You do this comment thing and at JSX pragma, and then you have to ignore something other than just importing React. So maybe there's a way around that, but that was one thing. But in terms of like not having purge CSS and having it just work, also like the TW prop is just cool because like it is way shorter than class names. And when I did like a find all in this big Tailwind UI component template I had and changed it to TW, like I saved so many lines because of prettier, like being able to fit it on one line. And it was actually dramatically like reduced the visual noise in the file. So I was like, that was a pretty big benefit for me.
Cool. Also, after a year of React, I still do class equals and then get yelled at. So get me away from that.
Yeah. I do CN and then let the auto suggest thing pull up class name. So that's what I usually do. So that part is cool. And then there's other cool things. I think you can even, you can do like, you can do like inline CSS. So usually like we bring in emotion or style components so that when we need to bail on Tailwind and like write something, just like a little one-off style that's not part of Tailwind, we do it there. But here, emotion core. Okay, so you can combine it with different things. I think I combine it with emotion. And so
cool.
It's just kind of nice because you can pass in, as a CSS prop, you can pass in the TW.macro. So not only can you do TW equals as a prop on your component, if you have the CSS prop, which takes in class names, you can pass in as a function like the TW, like template string function version. And then, so basically that's what it's doing. TW is basically a function that's returning a class name with the correct styles applied based on the arguments. So that's kind of how it works. And so it's actually cool because it's like a first class thing that you can pass around. And take it as like a class that you can use in other APIs. So it's pretty awesome, actually.
Cool.
You should definitely check it out. It also like helps you with like mistypings and other things. It's pretty neat. So the downsides are, which for me might be like enough to not want to use it, is like a few things. First of all, because it generates these class names on demand using whatever tool you're pairing it with, you don't get the ability to like easily toggle them in the dev tools when you're working and development, which for me is like huge. That's a huge part of my Tailwind workflow.
Yeah, when you're describing that, that's actually what I imagine, because I know you love to go in there and bring up the CLS tab in DevTools and turn things on and off.
Exactly. Turn them off. And then also the other thing is because it's building it as you go, it doesn't have the global set. And so you can't add new ones that you haven't done in the template yet. Again, in the DevTools, which again is part of my workflow.
Yeah. So you really lose that whole like DevTool build and then go back to code when you know what you want experience.
Yeah. I think they could fix that. Like, I think they could do both. Either turn the stuff off in development, or like also ship the Tailwind built style file. So like you have your little generated classes, which don't mean anything, but then you can toggle things. Mm-hmm. And it's just available for you. So that would be a really cool thing. But it's definitely worth checking out if you're using Tailwind and React. I recommend checking it out because it's really cool. It feels like it's a better integration in a sense because class names is just not React. It's not optimized for that. Like it's called class names. It's just not optimized for it, right?
Yeah. Also, too, just like getting tooling that could statically analyze that TW prop and right now I have this thing that like auto suggests Tailwind classes, but it's a little finicky and
right.
It's also like class name can be used by anyone.
Right.
So yeah. Yes.
Exactly. There's just something about it that's better to have it more tighter control and easily analyzable. That's the other downside is I think both the Headwind, Tailwind class sorting VS Code plugin I have and also the auto suggest one from Brad don't work with it. So
gotcha.
That's like a bummer too, because that's a big part of my workflow is like class name equals control space, and then I see all my classes start typing things. So it's like tough because they're both there, right? But I think Adam is actually going to hire some folks to start working on some of these like tooling ecosystem wide things. So
cool.
I think if this was a first party thing with Tailwind, it would work great, And so, that would be pretty sweet if we get that one day.
Adam is shaping that triangle.
He is. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's cool, right? In an ecosystem like that, you can just see what emerges and see which extensions are most popular and then like roll them back in. And it feels like that's kind of like what Mike did with Sidekick in our interview, right? Where he was like, he would just be working on it. And there's lots of people who are adding extra functionality to the core library. But once he identifies the things that are most important, roll it back in a first party way. I really like that approach. It's really cool because it's like bottom up and also like iteration and refinement,
Yeah, I mean a lot of things too. It's like it actually shows you're listening to your customers.
Yes,
which is something we always appreciate when we hear these stories.
Yes, and like there's like a Mirage GraphQL whole thing, which tells me there's a huge need for that, right? There's like Mirage types that were built by the community, which tells me there's a huge need for that. Actually, now that we have search on the Mirage.js thing, you can see the most searched terms that don't have results. Pretty interesting, man. And TypeScript is like by far and away the number one thing.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So there's not even a page or anything mentioned about it in the docs right now. So that's because it's brand new and still kinks are being worked out. But that's like pretty interesting to see that data.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So, and people have implemented like pagination, adapter things for Mirage too. So that's all like the spirit of this would be cool to like use that to prioritize some of our work on it. So, cool. You have this point about, you have a couple points here. Tailwind and CSS Grid. Do you remember what that was about?
Yeah, I do. So I've, what version of Tailwind got CSS Grid? Was it 1.0 or 1.2?
I think it was 1.2.
1.2. Okay. So that's been out for a few months now, maybe longer. Probably a few months. But I've been using it, and I wrote a thing in Ember like, I don't know, a year ago that used CSS Grid, and man, I did not understand it. Like it wasn't Tailwind. It was just me looking at the MDN docs for CSS Grid and Stack Overflow and copy and pasting things, and what I built worked, and it's great, and it's all responsive, but I just didn't understand how Grid worked. Yeah. Right? There's all this like 1FR and min-max and autoflow.
I still haven't learned it.
Well, so I've been building a few apps using Grid and Tailwind, and I noticed that like the utility approach to like I have an HTML element, I'm going to start adding utilities to it. It actually forces me to go think about what each utility is doing and learning it. So I feel like I know a lot more about CSS Grid since using Tailwind, since using like the utility first approach.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, it's just like I'm going to add this one little thing. Oh, it's also too, you don't have to like, I think a lot of the why Grid is so hard to learn is a lot of like the tutorials, like they're like, here's a CSS class with like 6 grid properties on it.
Right.
And let me explain to you what each one of them does. But with Tailwind, it's only here's one class with one property, here's what it does, and you apply them one at a time.
Right.
And it's funny, I use Tailwind because I hate CSS.
Yeah.
And yet my CSS
it's getting better.
Is getting like I'm
totally.
like really confident in it right now.
Yeah. It's the same with Flexbox, right? Whereas Tailwind made me like a ninja with Flexbox.
So I was thinking about that. I think I had before I used functional CSS, I was deep in that CSS tricks Flexbox article. Mm-hmm. And so although I wasn't using functional CSS, I had a good understanding of Flexbox because I had been building Flexbox BEM apps.
Gotcha.
So I think Grid is like the first new CSS concept that I've learned
through Tailwind.
And it's not like the first, the only thing in CSS I don't know, but it's like the first big multiple properties coming together to build a UI.
Right. It's a paradigm shift. Yeah.
Yeah. And just, thinking about a year and a half ago when I built that other app and just how I was just like, I just had no idea what I was doing.
Yeah, totally. That's cool. No, I think this is one of the biggest misconceptions I've seen about Tailwind when folks talk about it, especially folks who've never used it, which seems to be where all the misconceptions are. But Tailwind is an abstraction for people who know CSS. That's always been the case. I mean, Adam talked to us about that when we interviewed him a couple years ago. And it's not like Bootstrap lets you write a button if you don't really know how to use CSS, because all you have to do is add a button. But if you want to build a button with Tailwind, you have to understand how CSS works, because it's just an abstraction for the CSS properties themselves. So it's just funny to me because a lot of people will say like, just learn how to write CSS, don't use Tailwind. But in order to use Tailwind, you have to know how to use CSS. You have to. It's like like you said, it's a one-to-one mapping. It offers you some constraints and helpful guidance on like the best parts of CSS and how to use them together well. But like you said, you're learning CSS when you use Tailwind. And it's just funny to me because that point is just like completely lost on people.
Yeah. I mean, it was probably like, I'm not one of those anti-functional CSS people, but that point was probably lost on me.
Yeah.
Just building this thing. It's like, oh, I think if I ever want to learn something in CSS, I would basically find it in Tailwind and try to build it using Tailwind.
Yeah.
Because I think that is going to be the thing that teaches me what each prop does.
Yeah. And again, it's like it just is helpful because it's like curated in a sense. It's a curated subset of CSS that helps you use it well. So if you want to learn to do shadows, you could go read the docs and probably find some example that looks terrible, like shadows that look really ugly and doesn't really motivate you to want to learn it that much, or teaches it in a very abstract way. Or you could see what Adam and Steve have ended up with in Tailwind, and you're going to learn about multiple shadows, but you're going to see it in a really nice way that was like super polished and spent a ton of time making it look a certain way, right?
Yeah. And that's a really good point. Even with the grid stuff, there's so many options for grid.
Yes.
But Tailwind does not have all those options.
Right.
But you can look at the options that Tailwind has and you can say, okay, I should be able to build grids using only these options because
they're in Tailwind.
They've thought, yeah, exactly. They've thought about this. They know what they're doing.
Yep.
And so this should be enough to help me get my understanding right.
Yep. Totally, man. I mean, I've learned a lot about typography since I started working with Tailwind. Like before Tailwind, I personally didn't do a lot of custom typography stuff and changing the line height and changing the letter spacing. And again, with that, Tailwind coupled with refactoring UI, you learn that stuff, and it makes you more capable at CSS. But you're also becoming more capable at design. So the two things have a nice synergy with each other. So it's just funny to me because if I wanted to teach someone CSS who was new, like if they're learning web development, I'm definitely starting with HTML and CSS. Like start with HTML, then go to CSS, then go to JavaScript, let's say. And so CSS, you still want to learn how it works under the hood because it's a leaky abstraction in the sense. It has not been abstracted away at all. But if you want to get better at CSS, like Tailwind's a great way to do that because you're going to get better at creating these nice polished designs that you see in all of their work. And that's kind of going to be motivating. And you're going to learn techniques to do those kinds of things like layered shadows, like changing the line height and letter spacing, all that kind of stuff, So yeah, I think that's a really cool point.
Teaching someone CSS, that's like an awesome example, bringing this to an extreme. I kind of think that, like, why not start them with Tailwind? Like, it's so much easier to conceptually explain that, okay, you have a class, and when you add text red 500, it's going to make the text red.
Yeah.
And then when they start asking questions, then you can introduce, like, the actual CSS file and classes and selectors. But, like, to start, if you have to introduce a CSS file, a class, and then class name, that could be a lot.
Yeah. Well, this is an interesting point that you bring out. It goes back to, like, if you're learning web development, should you start with Rails and just do what the guides say and get faster feedback on your project and feel more satisfied because you're seeing real success? Or should you first play with MySQL and understand how databases work, at least at some level, and then you can understand the problems that MySQL or that Rails is solving for you? In my opinion, if I was literally sitting down with someone who didn't know anything about web development, I would open a blank file on a desktop and do HTML and then add like a style tag and explain how classes work, because it'd be one file and that is the target. That's like the compilation target of all this stuff, and try to motivate what problems tools like Tailwind and React solve. But give them some context for what's happening under the hood, But I think I would move fast because I do want people to be productive, and you want them to not get bogged down and stuff. But I think it's a really interesting question that you can go a lot of different ways on. Like, we've talked about this before. Like, I started with Symfony and I learned so much about web development and data modeling and databases and indexes and stuff like that when I was working with Symfony. Sometimes it helps you learn the core stuff faster, right? Because you're just learning it in this really polished way. So yeah, that's an interesting question.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I like, as you described that, I think I like the HTML file with a style tag.
I've done that on a plane with someone because we just started talking and she was interested in what I did, and I was explaining I make websites. And she's like, "How do you make websites?" I was like, I opened the Apple site and I like changed the headline, in the dev tools. And she was like, "Did you just change like the Apple's website or whatever?" It's like the best trick, right?
Yeah.
And so I like taught her web development. It was awesome, and I just like did it in a single file, and I feel like that's pretty good,
Very cool.
Single file components, the website index.html on your desktop, the OG single file component.
You're like, okay, so here's our HTML file. Now we're going to introduce Webpack.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So as a first step, you need to do your thing in a bundle so you don't get shamed by people who work at Google on Twitter when you start sharing your work. I don't know if you saw that drama over there.
Those people don't matter. I'm ignoring it.
Nice, man. I like that.
They
Hard
don't matter.
stance.
They don't matter. They literally have no
man.
value. They have no value. Like, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I couldn't agree more. So let's wrap up here with one more topic. So I was working on a project yesterday and ran into this issue. Now, I guess we only have about 10, 15 minutes. Every time we open up the node box,
Yeah.
usually need more than that. Maybe we can start it and we can see where we get and pick it up next episode. So we had this problem where we were pulling in a project that had not been run on outside of an internal network. And the internal network has a private NPM repository that's running, so a registry. So you can run your own npm registry and configure your project such that if you have an npm project that has a package JSON, when you run npm install, you can tell npm where to go to fetch those packages. And by default, when you do that, it goes to the npm registry, which is where we all publish all of our open source stuff. But a lot of companies have private registries where they put their private code. And so this project had some of that, and we didn't have access to it on our computers. So what we wanted to do was run the host app, be able to run npm install in it, and have it pull in 10 open source things, which it would be fine getting from npm's public registry. But then there's 3 private packages that it needed to get, right? So we got copies of those and put them on our computer, and then the fun began. So each one of those things needed to either be, basically the long story short is there's a couple ways to do this. One, you can link things with npm link or yarn link, and it just creates a symlink. So when your host project is looking for, Acme UI components, you just run yarn link Acme UI components, and then it creates a symlink literally in the local node modules folder, points to the other place on your machine where it is. And so that way Node can install everything and resolve everything and import everything. The other way you can do it is with the file protocol, where you in the version, what it would normally take the version of the package that you need, you do file : and then you do a relative path to this same directory. So it's another way of doing a link, basically. So those things work sometimes, but they play weirdly with other aspects of npm. So then you have this problem, right, where one of the dependencies, let's say Acme UI components, has some dev dependencies so that it can be worked on, right? Mm-hmm. It has a peer dependency on React, let's say. And that means that the host app, whoever installs Acme UI components, needs to bring their own version of React. That's what that means. But as we've talked about before, peer dependencies aren't they're used in a lot of the ecosystem, but they're not enforced by the tooling the same way other aspects are, dev dependencies and dependencies are.
Yeah, and they're also very easy to ignore, right? Who hasn't yarn installed, gotten a whole bunch of peer dependency things, and just, you don't even read them. You just try to yarn start and see if it works. Exactly.
But the goal of peer dependencies is to reduce duplication. So it's to say, if I depend on Lodash 2.5 and you depend on Lodash 2.6 and you depend on Lodash 2.8, and now someone installs our 3 libraries, they're going to have 3 versions of Lodash. So instead, just say it's a peer dependency. But again, it's it's used very inconsistently, and even JavaScript code in the ecosystem. Ed talked about this with us on his interviews. It's not even written in a way to really make that whole thing work. For peer dependencies to truly work, library authors would need to start authoring their libraries with much more lenient version ranges on all of their dependencies, so that the tooling could actually properly deduplicate things. But that's not how we build packages in JavaScript.
Yeah,
it's a huge problem. I'm hoping GitHub figures all of this out for us now that they bought npm. So I knew all that stuff before. It still took us a while to figure it out and get around it, but there was one new thing that happened that was pretty interesting. So I wanted to raise it in case it helps any future travelers. So this package, okay, so let's say you pull in Acme UI components, right? You clone it down or you pull it down somehow. And then from your host app, you either npm link it or you use the file protocol to point to UI components. Now, in your host app, if you run yarn start or yarn dev or whatever, it's going to start going to import things from UI components. And UI components also has dependencies, and it needs to pull things in as well, right? So if you just clone the repo, the UI components, and then link it up and then try to run your host app, it's not going to work because the UI components needs to have its dependencies installed as well. And because you're linking it, running npm install in the host app is not automatically going to install the dependencies of this new guy here. Whereas it normally does install all transitive dependencies when a top level package dependencies is there.
Is a solution here to go into that symlink directory, so Acme UI components, and run yarn install over there?
Exactly. And this is always how I've done it because I've run against this problem a bunch. Mirage development, whatever. You have like a couple things linked, and each one has to have run npm install or yarn install in their own directories, right? So that they have like a complete dependency graph, and then when anyone links to them, it works. So that's what I did, right? So I was pairing with my brother actually, and you run yarn install there, and then you come back and do the thing. And we got this crazy error that was like a hooks violation, React hooks violation. And to React's credit, it's a really good error message, but there's like too many reasons why it can happen. So it's basically like you violated the rules of hooks. You like called one render, you called use state, and the next one you call like use state, use context. So it was like you violated the rules of hooks. This wasn't our code that we had written, and so we were like trying to figure it out, right? And the error message tells you like there's 3 ways that this can happen. One is if you like call it conditionally, another is if something else happens, and then another one is if you have multiple copies of React in your bundle. Because if you have multiple copies of React, you can just get into a weird spot.
Okay. So
they give you this way to debug this. So what you do is you go into React and you do like window.version equals require React DOM. Oh, it also can happen if you have a conflict between React and React DOM versions. So there's like all these different ways that this error can happen. And they have a whole page on the website that's just dedicated to this error because it's like a very complex error that can arise from like many situations and they can't pinpoint what the cause is at the time it happens.
It seems too like you get this error when you hit situations like the one you're describing and there's like a lot of complexity. You don't hit this like error in a simple app.
Exactly.
And I don't mean like simple. I just mean like in a little demo app.
Exactly.
All right, keep going.
Yeah. So what happened was, so they give you a way to figure out if you have different versions of React and React DOM, or if you have multiple copies of React on the page. And we did the thing where you require React DOM and React, and you print out the version, and then you do it in your component and print it out in C. It was the same. We did the same thing for React, and it was like, okay, we have the same, even though they did have different version requirements, like the Acme components had like React, whatever, what is it, 16.0, and then the app had like 16.2 or something like that. So I was like, I don't know, I feel like this is definitely not like a conditional hook call. Like it's not a runtime logic error. Also because like the folks that we're working with had this running on their system. So I was like, we didn't change this code. It's got to be something related to this linking stuff. And so yeah, it turns out, I actually still don't 100% know, but I'm basically sure that it was multiple copies of React, even though the thing that we did didn't tell us that because they were the same versions. So this is what happened. Acme Components has a peer dependency on React. It also has a dev dependency of React, React DOM, and 2 other libraries, and 1 dependency. So if you're developing Acme Components, you run yarn install, you get dependencies and dev dependencies. And React is in dev dependencies because as you build it, you need React. But if it's being consumed by a host app, the host app is supposed to provide React because React is also a peer dependency and the Acme components.
Oh, so now like the location that you run yarn install is actually meaningful. So exactly. You can't, my whole thing about, just go into the directory and run yarn install there. It's like, well, now you're getting the dev dependency, that peer dependency is meaningless.
Exactly.
Is it meaningless?
I don't know exactly how it all shook out, but basically in a normal situation, when you run yarn install in the host app, in the top level app, you get that app's dependencies and dev dependencies installed. But then as your NPM is traversing the whole graph and installing all the NPM packages, it's pulling in each one of their dependencies, their production dependencies, not their dev dependencies, right? Because if I depend on Lodash, I need what Lodash depends on, but not what Lodash depends on for its development environment. So I don't need Lodash's dev dependencies. I just need Lodash's dependencies. But in this case, because we were responsible for installing the transitive dependency and we ran yarn install in Acme components, it pulled in Acme components dev dependencies as well. And then for somehow basically the resolution algorithm, when UI components imported React or whatever, imported the use state, it just pulled it from its local node modules React folder because like Yarn wasn't able to hoist things properly or whatever. So basically that's more or less what happened.
I have two thoughts on this. I think the first is like, I think there is a way to Yarn install in like production mode.
Yeah. So that was the answer, is because it did have one production dependency. And so in the Acme components, you just do Yarn install like whatever production or node environment,
it's like node
production or whatever.
Production or Yarn
exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Exactly. So that was the answer. Okay.
That was the answer.
We do something like this on our app servers with our Ember apps. You need the whole dev dependencies to build an Ember app, but if you want to run something like Fastboot, you don't need all of the whole thing.
Everything.
Also, too, like on a containerized app server, Yarn installing dev dependencies of an Ember app get you in trouble with your hosting provider because you're shipping gigabyte containers.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So that was a solution. It took us a while to figure out.
Yeah. And unfortunately, like it kind of broke my whole mental model here because like I've been doing open source for years now and I'm always linking things. And say you are developing UI components, you want the dev dependencies there because you're running that locally. And over here, you want to test that the thing consuming your UI components is able to do what it needs to do. So you also want that to run. And so this really threw me off. And I don't know if it was because of the peer dependencies entry and that threw off the resolution. But so we have to play with that some more. But like for me, I want one answer to how do I do local development of like a dependency. And thus far it's been like Yarn install and then Yarn link and it all works. But like there's like a lot of subtle differences here.
Yeah.
So kind of weird.
It's really tough. I mean, I think because we don't run into this problem every day, probably just keep doing what we're doing. And
yeah, it makes me wonder how many versions of things are in that bundle by the time you're looking at it on your computer. But
yeah,
pretty interesting. So maybe we'll pick up this because we got to get going here. But there was one other aspect I wanted to talk about, and I want to mention it so I don't forget it for next time. It was it? Let me think really quick. Dev dependencies.
Something about like building files. Was that it? Because I know you ran into.
Oh, that. Yeah. Exactly. Building. Yeah. That was it. So it was when you have a dist and you need to run a build. All the stuff that happens when you publish to the npm registry that doesn't happen when you're developing locally. We have this problem in Mirage too. So you can't just link to Mirage and make a tweak on GitHub because you have to run yarn build for someone to use Mirage.
Because we publish
have a rollup build.
Dist.
It's like completely different.
And we have like ESM modules that are linked to in package.json, so you have to build them. Yeah, exactly. So that's a real bummer because now you have to use something like NodeMon to like watch your file system and start rebuilding, and then it's like, okay, it's 5:00.
Yeah,
pick this up tomorrow.
So maybe we'll have some more things to say about that next week, but I want to talk more about that and talk about what an ideal solution would look like, because it's like this whole thing, figuring this out was like really came down to just not having this stuff be very clear and consistent. And I want to figure out if it's something we can improve in the particular project we're doing and also our understanding of the process, how people are doing this in open source and if they're doing it consistently or if it's just a big cluster. So I'm hoping to learn a little bit about all this stuff.
Nice.
All right. Well, we do have to cut it short today. Well, it's not that short, but maybe sometimes for us it is. Hey, that's it. One in the bag, man. Frontend First.
Nice.
That's us. I'm excited about it. I hope you're excited about it. We appreciate you all following us along and excited to do, to start bringing some more folks on, to interview, to guest. If you have any suggestions for things you want to talk about or people who would be a good fit to chat with us, let us know. If you have any questions or topics you want us to talk about, let us know. We're always love hearing from you. So thank you so much for listening. We'll see y'all next week.